Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to 5 Ways to Uplevel Your European Travel Program in 2026. Today's speakers include myself. My name is Kim Hamer. I'm Navan's Chief Travel Advisory Officer. We also have with us today Danny Cockton, who is VP of Global Travel Services at Wood PLC, and Kerrie Henshaw-Cox, who is the former Director of Global Travel Services at AstraZeneca. The study in 5 Ways to Uplevel Your European Travel Program methodology was provided by Independent Insights with Timoji. One of the biggest things that we found was and heard from travel buyers in the community was the power of simplicity. 60% of all travel managers are focused on simplifying their travel programs today, whether it's transaction fees, whether it's travel policy, duty of care, sustainability, really looking at holistically, how can we simplify and make things easier, not only as a buyer for us, but also for travelers. 5 key opportunities came out of the study, and you can see those here on the screen, and we'll touch on each one individually. We will start with the first one, which is increased platform adoption. 36% of travel managers cited lower prices as their main driver behind off-platform bookings. Traveler confidence drops by almost 15% if access to content becomes a barrier, if you hear people saying, I can find cheaper prices elsewhere. Kerrie, we'll start with you. Have you experienced the same correlation between cost and content for off-platform bookings? And if so, what was your strategy to prevent leakage?
Yes, most definitely. The pricing issues that you face when it's outside of your program is one of the things that drives that off-platform booking. And I would say that's an age-old issue, isn't it? It's always been the same. I can get it cheaper somewhere else has been the bane of any travel manager's life. I think one of the things we did when I was at AstraZeneca, well, there's a few things, but one of the things we did was around the C-suite engagement and support, around partnering with suppliers, and around improving our communications. Because the perception that it's cheaper elsewhere and outside is not always the reality. And when someone sees something cheaper, they go outside, and then there's the add-ons and the builds and everything else. And finally, they can come back. But there are occasions when it is genuinely cheaper. I think within an organization, it differs from one to another. But in the AstraZeneca case, we really built on the risk management element as a strategy to prevent the leakage. And luckily, we had real high-level support of this at C-suite level, where I remember a discussion with a senior leader saying their team could regularly find airfares cheaper. And the argument that we gave was, as soon as you go outside of our program, we lose sight of you. From a risk management perspective, we lose sight of visibility of our people and where they are when they need us. But also when you've gone outside, we lose sight of the spend and we lose sight of the emissions, which was very important at AstraZeneca. And the business leader wanted to put a case forward where they said, well, what if a fare was, let's say, $2,000 cheaper than what we...
Oh, I think we lost her there for a second. I will pivot. Danny, knowing that Kerrie's been talking about risk management as a strategy and other opportunities around bringing content in as a key factor, what was your strategy to prevent leakage? And are you experiencing that same correlation between cost and content for off-platform?
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the joys of human beings is they will always try to break the rules, right? I think We all have that sort of ingrained within our DNA. So travellers are no different in organisations, and naturally, when it comes to travel, for those of us who've been in it a long time, although I'm not comfortable being called a veteran, somebody called me a veteran the other day. And for those of us that have been in it a long time, we're so used to hearing this. I can find it cheaper online and having the arguments with people who know about travel far more than we could ever do. And so pulling different levers is critical and duty of care, particularly in the world in which we operate in the energy markets, is critical. But again, a little bit to Kerrie's point where she was talking about working with C-suite. In order to do that, you have to be able to articulate the value of a managed program and everything that goes beyond the transaction, not just the duty of care, not just the actual booking purpose, but it's the end-to-end piece from HR feed through to reconciliation and everything in between. And it's important that you're able to socialize that story, and I'm sure we'll come on to more of that later. But it's very much about being able to be confident in the program that you're putting in place and the reasons that you're doing it. And then that $10-15 difference in an airfare or in a hotel rate actually all of a sudden becomes a very small fee to pay for a lot of extra great service.
And when you pull all of these things together, are you finding that it is creating that extra kind of stickiness and you have that capability then to show the value in the program?
Yeah, for sure. And also making sure you got the right control mechanisms in place, right, for the inevitable mavericks. So whether it's through the out of policy signals when you're making a booking, or whether it's through the reconciliation and expenses piece and putting some red flags in there when it goes up to leaders for approval, etc. So you've got to make sure you've got the control mechanisms as well as a really good story.
Yeah, great. I tend to agree with that, and I would also just add, having been a buyer, content was one of the things that I was most focused on, and I really felt that getting buy-in or bringing in as much content as possible into the system also helped, not just from a stickiness perspective, but building in that trust and confidence so that you're not seeing that correlation around, I can find it cheaper elsewhere, and those that are going off platform. So oftentimes in the beginning, when you start to implement that content, you'll see people still kind of going off platform to check prices. But as they start to see historically now that things either tie together or you're seeing lower fares or rates on platform, it starts to drive more people to it, and it builds that trust and confidence level.
Yeah, for sure. I think content's obviously very important for luring people in almost, but making sure they're booking the right fare or the right price of a hotel at the right time, the right rate at the right time is really important as well, and that's part of our educational responsibility. Because if let's take the Middle East at the moment, if somebody wants to transit through the Middle East at the moment, you definitely wouldn't want them booking a fully restricted NDC ticket, right? You want some flexibility in that. So part of our role needs to be about, again, it's that beyond the transaction piece, which is the detail that often gets missed from the headline fare or rates.
That's right. Well, moving into or transitioning, I guess, from that piece, which can create some inefficiencies, it's eliminating program efficiency is another opportunity in managing your program in 2026. We found that 44% of travel managers complained about some of the inefficient processes that they had in their programs today, while 57% of them said the technology hasn't solved the problems it was meant to. Danny, in your experience, have these inefficiencies stem from technology, process, or both? Were there any contributing factors?
So in my experience, and not everyone's going to like my answer to this, but in my experience, a lot of the problem lies with us as the customer. So again, going back to that whole ecosystem, whether it's from your HR feed all the way through to the reconciliation process, if you've built something that, if there's any kind of gap in that particular set of data flowing through all those different systems, and generally it's coming from the HR feed, that's where the problem usually starts. And then if you've linked systems together, if you've got multiple systems linked together and there's something missing, it's generally because the statement of work or the scope of works hasn't necessarily been delivered properly. And that's a contributing factor between both parties, right? Whoever's putting the service in and whoever's including all the data and all that implementation piece. So I always and I find it hard to do myself sometimes because it's an ugly thing to do. I have to look in the mirror and make sure that we've got all of our ducks in a row, because the easy thing to do, and the easy thing that does happen so often, is the TMC or the technology provider just gets the finger pointed at it. But generally, that's as a result of building on sand rather than building on something really solid and a good structure. So I would say the ones complaining, take a look in the mirror first. And I know that's difficult to do sometimes, but very often that's the way you fix the problem at source, rather than trying to put sticking plasters on everything.
I like what you say there, because I think there's a couple of things that you can focus on, as we think of this key theme really being simplification and what travel leaders are looking for their programs today. There's this tendency to want to overcomplicate, just like you were talking about, right? So looking at a configuration of an online platform, or even on the operational side, sometimes we tend to go just a bit too far and saying, okay, how do we overcomplicate this policy a little bit more? How do we complicate the configuration of the platform? And so that does lead to some dissatisfaction on the overall experience of the traveler themselves. Kerrie, in your role as a program leader, what did you do to attack this problem?
I agree with Danny. He said about, well, people won't want to hear this, but actually I agree that we, within the corporates, especially the bigger organizations, you have so many processes, approval processes, HR feeds, HR rules, policies. And even within an organization, you'll have from business unit to business unit their ways of working. And then you've got you bring a piece of technology in on the merits that it has at that time, and then suddenly there's a development, and you work through, and a year or two later you're bringing something else in, and you're trying to force it to connect to or linked to the piece of technology that you already had in place. So I think, again, as travel managers, we need to be communicating, working in partnership with our suppliers, sharing strategies, sharing objectives better. What are we looking for? I always go back to the what and the how. What is our aim? What are we trying to do? And then how are we going to get there? And try and simplify the how we're going to get there, even if it means taking a really long, hard step back and saying, we need to stop here, we need to readdress this, because the longer term benefits will be more beneficial than just carrying on and trying to muckle something together and forcing them to work. And that's our role with that middle piece in this.
I would add to that as well, if I may, just to say, one of the things that gets lost in that is that you put something together and it's not quite working as you planned it to work, and that's okay. We kind of go back and fix it, but make sure you communicate with your stakeholders internally, whether it's bookers or travelers or whomever, because you're in danger then of creating another problem and another cottage industry of lots and lots of complaints over one minor change on an approval process. So make sure you communicate, and make sure you're very clear as well internally. The problem sits with us and not with the TMC, because otherwise the TMC then gets overloaded with problems, and that creates unnecessary friction between and breaks the trust that you may have built between the TMC and the traveller.
Yeah, I think oftentimes too.
The question here is about, is it both? It absolutely is. It's a mixture of everything that causes those inefficiencies.
Yeah, and ways that I think we can thwart some of these is really just asking almost the so what question every time. If we don't do it, what will happen, right? So what, or why are we doing this? And at the end of the day, what's in it for the travel program from an outcome perspective, or what's in it for the traveler? Is it really going to help them throughout this process, whether it's looking at the actual booking itself, or as Danny was talking about, through to reconciliation?
There's one other point I'd add, Kim, is that you might want to bring in a great piece of technology, but actually it takes time to implement, and it takes people to help implement. So how have we tackled the problem in the past? Actually, to have a project team working specifically on the implementation of a new piece of technology, so that the day-to-day jobs can continue with the travel team, but this specific project then integrates with what you're doing. So if you can get support and sponsorship and investment, not just to buy the technology, but to buy the resource that needs to implement implement it, then you'll hopefully eliminate those inefficiencies along the way.
Yeah, well stated, Kerrie. One of the things that we heard here was that 66% of travel managers said they regularly are having to defend their travel management fees to finance leads. And 42% of them said they don't fully understand the TMC fee structure. Where do you think this confusion comes from? And how can travel managers get better clarity and transparency on those fees to help build credibility with finance? Kerrie, we'll start with you.
For me, it's a little bit like the last question. I think we need to take responsibility and accountability for what we are selling into our business. So if we're going to negotiate with the TMC to bring a TMC on board, have the confidence and strength to negotiate with the TMC the fees that work best for you. And going back to the first side about simplicity, you can have 50, 60, 100 variations on a fee. It's a hotel with a flight. It's a flight only. It's a flight with a hotel under blah, 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 blah. And so it goes on. If we could have simple and a very few number of transactions fees, it would be ideal, and it would be a great thing to then sell into the business. So take responsibility for negotiating what you want when you're with the TMC. The same for the TMC. Well, I'm sure it would be far easier in their systems if they had fewer fees to load and manage and audit, etc. I know of one organisation, and I won't mention any names, that I don't know if it's still the case, but they used to have like a centralised management fee structure. So no market, no country paid individual transaction fees. They managed it completely centrally by the travel team. The benefits of this was A, they didn't get any noise from the business. Why am I paying this and then a transaction fee? I can get it cheaper elsewhere, because they had no sight of it in the individual countries. The second was because the budget was managed centrally. Any country that then wanted to change the TMC had to either get approval from the travel team, which included the fact or the statement that, well, you can't move from the one we've got unless you're prepared to pay those fees yourself. So now the country has an incentive to stay with the global program because it's all paid for centrally. And I wonder if there's more to be explored in that. I know it's not an isolated old way of pricing. I know it still goes on today, but it feels like that would be, if you can discuss it in a win-win. Here's our total transactions. Here's the total cost of managing our program. Maybe some reconciliation on a quarterly basis. Are we up or down on that? That to me would be worth investigating.
And I think it's important for buyers to know that they have options, right? So really
Yeah.
discuss with your TMC what the options are with the fee structure. Some don't have a centralized budget to be able to manage or pay for it centrally. And so oftentimes those transaction fees are billed at the point of sale. I know in my former role, I was able to reverse that and go from a transaction fee that was paying at the point of sale to what you were talking about, and actually centralizing that budget and paying on a subscription fee.
Yeah.
So it was very clear as to what we were paying for, and we didn't have a long menu item of fees. The other options are talk to your TMCs about simplification again, right? Simplifying that fee structure,
Yeah.
and going to a limited number of fees, or to a trip fee where you've got one or two that you know what you're paying for exactly. Danny, what about you?
Yeah, I would say, this is a historical problem that's evolved over a number of decades now, probably, from the erosion of airline commissions and TMCs kind of relying on that income. And then the advent of procurement really kind of putting in the RFP processes and whatnot, which would then ultimately drive down the fees to generally to the lowest common denominator where you can. And that's driven TMCs to create those complex pricing models where they're trying to obviously make sure they retain a profit. For me, I think it's about understanding how much the service costs, what your profit is. We know you've got to make profit, and we're perfectly okay with that, right? and then slicing that cake however it seems fit for your organization, whether it's a centralized fee, as Kerrie's mentioned, or we prefer a transaction fee model because of how it's distributed among projects, etc. So I think it just really depends on what you want to get out of it or how you want to structure it. But I think TMCs should just be happy to be honest about the profit that they need to make from each customer, how they're going to make that, because it won't just be through transaction fees, and then build a system that everybody's comfortable with, and we see that transparency, to Kerrie's point, on a regular basis, so we can ebb and flow as necessary.
Totally agree with what Danny's saying. I'm not promoting this centralized model.
Yes.
I'm just saying it's an option to explore. But that transparency, it's got to be win-win. We're all in a business. We want you to make money. If you make money out of our account, you're going to work with our account really well. So yeah, that transparency would make everyone's life, well, certainly on a buyer's side, make the buyer's life easier.
I think it goes back to the first
Yeah.
point really that I made about articulation of value, right? If you can stand by the value that a TMC is bringing to your organization, you can stand by the cost of it, right? Same as any other product or service.
And I would agree, transparency and communication are key. So, Danny, to your point, having the conversation, right, to be able to discuss what is it that you need to make from a profitability standpoint, and how do you get there? So how do we charge those fees to make that accurate versus maybe not being as transparent and bearing fees in different ways? Which leads us to transparency and actionable data insights. Opportunity number 4. 42% of travel managers said they couldn't easily access the data that they need, and only 16% said that they felt that they used their data extremely well. What do you think are the most important data points for travel managers to track, and why? And how can they use those data insights to prove program efficiency and ROI? And I think this really comes back to, Danny, as you talked about a little bit earlier, but even from a simplification standpoint, also selling the value of a managed travel program. I mean, in today's environment, we know that there's a lot of scrutiny around managed travel. How do you use some of these data insights, and what insights do you use to really elevate this when you're talking to the C-suite or other executives within your companies? Danny, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think what data points are important for travel managers will wholly depend on that customer and what's important to that business at that particular time. So if I think about our own organization, there's a lot of our travel is reimbursable to a customer, right? So it's about the accuracy of the invoicing and the speed of which we can then get that bill out to the customer so that it hits the right project deadlines for the customer and for us. That then obviously impacts cash flow and things like that. So time to bill is a more important metric necessarily than the number of transactions on a monthly basis. So it very much depends on the customer and where you're at. If you're a production company, for example, making the next Harry Potter film, then you might want to do that to a budget and be tracking that budget on a weekly, monthly basis. So I think it very much depends on what you need. But I think the question you should always be asking your TMC is, how do you help me achieve my objective, and what data can you provide to back it up? And I think 16% saying that they only use data extremely well is a sad number to see. But the problem is that there's so much data thrown out at travel managers that they kind of get a little bit overwhelmed with it. And if you think about the old-fashioned quarterly review scenario where you've got 72 slides of nonsense looking 3 months behind you, no wonder they don't know what, it's like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? So it's making sure you really understand what you need for your business, asking for it and insisting on it, and then you'll very quickly see if there's gaps in any of that and understand that you can collaborate to fix them and put them together.
Are you finding that the data is better these days? Are you getting data on a more timely basis?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing it come through quicker, like within 48 hours maximum. And that's even where we've got partners in Latin America and so on and so forth. So we're definitely seeing the speed increase, and the accuracy is definitely improved. I mean, we're in a fortunate position where we've been able to consolidate into one TMC globally, which is unusual for an organization like ours with so much fragmentation and project-based work. But we have been able to do that, and TMCs, the global TMCs, are getting much better at kind of capturing all that information and having a system and a process for their partners as well. So it's definitely improving. There's still this sort of desire for TMCs to give you that information that's looking over the shoulder rather than looking forward.
And Kerrie, knowing that you had a lot of government regulatory requirements that you had to manage with HCP and others, what were some of the most important points aside from that you had to work with, and why, and how were you using those insights?
Yeah, so for me, there were three key areas of data that we needed. It was visibility of people, which is your risk management side. It was visibility of spend, and I'll go into that a little bit more. And then visibility of emissions, because sustainability was and is massive for AstraZeneca, to the point where we publicly declared what the emissions would be and what the reductions would be. But I think all of those should align to your company objectives as well. So AstraZeneca had a sustainability agenda, the procurement and spend data, and then the risk management and traveller health well-being elements. So I think you've got to look internally at your own company strategy and make sure that the data that you're giving aligns to the company strategy, because then you're going to get the attention of the people that are reading it. We did a review of our reporting, I would say 2 or 3 years ago, and it was really evident that, like you say, there was those 60 odd slides that were going through and not being used. And some of the things that we were reporting on, just they were being read, but no action was being taken. So I go back to actionable information. So how can you use the data to improve efficiencies? Well, the efficiencies should come if they align to the objectives. So sustainability and emissions reporting was massive. What could we do with the data and visibility we had of the emissions to go back to the individual business units to say, here's how you could travel smarter and better in order to reduce the emissions aligned to the company objectives. So that would be the one for me. I was at the ITM summit recently, and I loved something that was said on the stage where a client simply wanted three things. Wanted to know what they were paying, was it the right amount, and what were their competitors paying? And I thought that was a great simple approach to the data that you could get from data providers, TMCs, or internal information as well.
Yeah, it's interesting too, I think those are three good points to be thinking about. In addition to what you both said, that we're all aligned with around making sure that your program is aligned with your corporate goals and that you have the reporting to support it so that you can show where are the efficiencies, where's the value, and where's the ROI. I think that makes a difference. The other component I would say is with AI coming into play now, there are other opportunities to start asking some of the what if questions. You can get more into some of the predictive analytics. So, what if I were to look at changing class of service? What if we were to cut back on this sense? How would that impact our program moving forward? And so it's really interesting to see how AI is starting to integrate with some of this data to produce more analytics for you so that you have the opportunity to actually be proactive in the conversations with your executives and your finance teams. Creating a seat at the table. So we just started talking about that. Travel teams reported a 10% increase in confidence around their ROI when they had clear C-suite sponsorship. Danny, how does your team convince the C-suite, that travel is a strategic lever for growth, and how do you get your executive level support when needed?
So the first simple task is to have a business plan, should I say, that's aligned to company objectives, right? So most companies will have some sort of statement that says these are the company pillars, if you like, which are usually aligned to three areas: people and culture, performance of the business, and profit and growth, or hitting your numbers. And it's making sure whatever it is you've got on your agenda is aligned to that, right? It might be you need to create or build a feed into international SOS or other security partner. That sits under the the people and culture piece. And I think if you can build out your business plan for the year on all those different activities that's aligned with that, you're speaking their language straight away. So they can start hanging the hat on things. And it's not a complicated thing to do. It's really a simple thing to do. The hardest bit is having the courage to knock on the door and say, give me 5 minutes of your time. So I think once you're through that door, then they're engaged. They're going to be interested, right? Travel's a cool thing to talk about. No matter what industry you work in, everybody wants to know about travel. And once you start showing a little bit of knowledge, they're going to be engaged with you. So that's never the problem. It's just making sure you have a very simple business plan that aligns to all the language they want to hear. And then generally, you're going to start getting support and investment. And if you, again, most of the things we do have got a very clear ROI model on them. So if you want to invest in a new expenses tool and it's going to produce a $3, $4, $5 million saving as a result of it, then someone's ears are going to prick up, right? Because they're going to say, "Oh, right, this is really simple. It's not a huge cost, and you can implement it easily, and all this sort of stuff." That's how you get the seat at the table, is by just continuing to show that business plan and all that good stuff that we're doing that so often just sits under the rock and never gets noticed.
Kerrie, did you approach it in the same way?
Yeah, very much. To get that C-suite support is vital, but it's so difficult. For most of us, travel is not a core part of our business. It's that small enabling function within the organization. And so to get that attention and to get that seat at the table can be quite a challenge. I would also say, like Danny said, keep working at it, but look for internal network, internal stakeholders, internal sponsors that can also, so you're not going straight to the C-suite, you're working up and you've got someone to support you and someone to back you or even coach or mentor you. Because as travel managers, there is a an element of skill and confidence to go to a C-suite level and present your case. So use that internal network, find a sponsor. I absolutely agree with Danny about being aligned to strategic objectives. And unfortunately, in my world, it was sustainability. It was the emissions, because we were publicly declaring what our emissions were, and we had a story to tell and we had improvements to make. And one of the proudest moments for me is when the CEO said, "Travel is a strategic enabler to the success of this business." What a great quote to have. It didn't get us a seat at every meeting, probably once or twice a year. We were able to go in and have that face to face. But, AstraZeneca is a massive organization. So be persistent, learn some skills, use your network, get that sponsorship. But the value of having it once you've got it is phenomenal.
I think I'd also add to that, like, just in terms of, and I go back to a slide I once saw at an ITM conference a number of years ago, where somebody kind of put this wheel of, or pie chart up, of all the different activities of a travel manager, and it was a percentage on how the time was being spent, and there was like all these hundreds of different things. That actually 80% of your time should be internally focused, working with your teams, working with the different business partners, understanding what they need. It's so important, and it's very easy to get carried away that we do the opposite and get 80% external and supplier focused and TMC time and all this sort of stuff. You've got to spend that time building your network internally, and you've got to keep knocking on those doors, no matter how many times you get shut in your face. I remember Karen Hutchins once saying, being a travel manager is like being a salesperson on steroids, and I think that's a really good way to look at it.
The other thing about having C-suite support is, if you've gone to that C-suite, you've probably made a presentation. You don't just go in and talk, you do a lot of planning, and usually it's narrowing down the 30 slides to 3, because that's all they've got time for. So again, there's a skill in that. But once you've got those 3 slides, you can then use those to business leaders within the organization. And if their C-suite has accepted and endorse it, you can be damn well sure that it'll be accepted and listened to around the business. It's not a case of just because the execs say it, so you can just rely on it. Use it. Use that refined, high level, excellent few slides that you've got and take it to other business leaders, and it will resonate with them.
And it's really about becoming a storyteller, right? So
yeah,
absolutely. When I joined Wood, in part of the interview process, they said to me, "Is there anything you would like?" I said, "Yeah, I want 30 minutes with the CEO and 30 minutes with the CFO." And I gave them both the same spiel. You need to stop looking at travel as a cost, and you need to look at it as an enabler. So now on the front slide, we've got an image. You might have seen it if anybody was at the ITM conference, but it just says Global Travel Services enables our remarkable people to design, build, and advance the world. That sits on our intranet. It sits on our. You've got to brand yourself almost and put your service out there and show the world internally at your organisation what you're all about and why you're there.
That's exactly right. Well said, Danny. Seizing the opportunity, which you were just talking about. Successful program management really requires the right platform, the right partners to help make the results more effective. But it all comes down to you as well as a program lead to really kind of drive the results that you want internally. It's that balance, Danny, that you were talking about relative to making sure you don't get too involved in all of the day-to-day so that you can actually build those networks and relationships with those key stakeholders within the organization to deliver the message and tell the story about the value of the program. One industry leader said an engagement officer would be a more fitting title than travel manager. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with it, to be honest. I think it's such an important thing. And when I joined Wood, the first thing we did, we had so many problems, right? We didn't have a coherent HR feed. We had no way of paying for travel. We had 23 different TMCs in operation, I think, at the time, probably more than that in some places. So it was just, a whole kind of heap of nonsense. The first thing we did was go and listen to the business and go and speak to people and start engaging and take the flak and tell them we know it's rubbish and be honest about where it's at. And that's okay. Absolutely okay. People will appreciate the honesty. And even if it's rubbish for another 6 months, it's okay to be honest about it. So long as you communicate what it is you're fixing and how you're going about it, and they can see some logic and structure behind what you're doing. People love to be engaged. And, I think it's the hardest thing to do. I always use the analogy from Ted Lasso, which is fix the showers. So when he does the suggestion box and everybody's calling him all sorts of things in the suggestion box, but one person says the shower pressure's rubbish and they fix it. So you fix one thing and people that's how you start to build trust and credibility. It's such an important thing to do. Speaking of engagement, I think we've been asked to encourage people to ask questions. So that's my plea for a question from the audience.
Love it. I will start looking at those. Kerrie, what about you? How would you help drive changes in corporate culture for programs?
I was going to go back to one of the things that Danny said, which was about listening. So an engagement officer, absolutely, as well as the finance expert, the IT expert, the trending expert, the procurement expert, and everything else, and the support when things go wrong, and all of those roles that we have to play, and mentioned being the salesperson on steroids, but it's not just about selling in what we have. It's really about listening to the business. We don't go off at a tangent and just do what we think is the right thing to do. We've got to be aligned to the business. We've got to be aligned to the strategic objectives, to the corporate objectives, to the corporate agenda, because then the message fits. And in organizations, there are different business units with different functions, and they're all traveling. And so and they will be aligned to the business, but they've got a slight tweak on it. So I know in the pharmaceutical world, you'll have the medical reps and the commercial teams going out, but then you'll have the scientists in the R&D world, and they come at it from very different angles. Even though sustainability, health and well-being, and spend are all important, they have a slight slant to them. So go and listen to those, engage with those stakeholders, but make sure you're sitting and listening to what's important to them. And that would be my one piece of seizing the opportunity. I tried to bring together a steering committee of senior leaders from finance, from commercial, from R&D, from HR, to say, what are we going to do with the program? And whilst they were all aligned on let's reduce spend and let's reduce our emissions, It was different for each of them, and I actually had to break it down and have the separate meetings with each of them to be really clear of what was important to them. You could go to the nth degree. I wouldn't recommend that, but make sure you're still engaging with the senior leaders from that top-down approach. I'd also say there's the bottom up. You've got those assistants booking the travel. Make sure you're listening to them as well.
And that goes back to the title or the recommendation for the title of engagement officer, right? Because you're engaging not only within the company, but you're turning around and then engaging with your suppliers to deliver the feedback that you're getting.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a little story. Recently, I was dragged into a call around another service that's provided within the company because we didn't have a handle on the spend, so it was mobile phones. I don't know why I was invited to the meeting originally, but I was there anyway, and I went with enthusiasm. So I asked what I thought was the most obvious question, which is, well, how much are we spending and how many phones have we got? To which somebody said, well, we know where they are in these countries over here and these countries over here, but the others we're not too worried about. I said, well, why don't we go and find out? And it was like such a fear factor to go to all these 30, 40 different countries that they weren't particularly sort of in lockstep with. So I said, don't worry, my team will get it, because what we've built is like an internal CRM for each country. And we've got the finance manager, we've got the procurement people, we've got the country managers. And because we've done so much engagement with each country, it took us like 4 days to get all this information. So all of a sudden, you start adding value in ways that you never thought possible. So it's so important to get your name out there, because there's so many other things you can do beyond travel as well.
Yeah, fair points. Well, you asked for questions, Danny. So, and it is your birthday, so we do want to deliver on those. One of the questions that came in is, if you were building a travel program from scratch today, what would you simplify first?
Is this to me?
Yes.
Okay, so it's very, very unsexy, I'm afraid, and very, very dull and boring, but it would be profiles. So I would look to do something really, really simple with profiles, whereby we could own the profiles ourselves, because what we've found over the years is when we've got profiles that are lodged with either the TMC or elsewhere, it doesn't give us the control that we would like, because there's so many other things we could do with those profiles beyond the travel and beyond the trip. So it would be profiles and carving those out in some way, but making sure we have total ownership within our own environment, and then we can send you them.
And would you say that that's at the individual level, or are you saying at the corporate level?
Well, that's a question. I mean, obviously, as a sort of travel leader, I would always say within the corporate level, but I think there's a very good argument for it to be at the individual level, and I think that's worthy of discussion and time. So it sounds like a simple thing, but it isn't. It's quite a complex thing to do, but I think it's very, very important to so all the things that we've said before about the ecosystem, right? If your profile's right, then everything else is generally going to be in a good spot. So.
Yeah, I think it's a really good topic for discussion, and probably something we could talk about in a lot of depth, because then you start thinking about data privacy and, right, corporations just don't want to own that kind of data to be deciding what they share and what they don't share. So the individuals having that autonomy to be able to decide is a very interesting concept.
Yeah.
I'm going to shift a little bit, Kerrie, and I'm going to ask you a question. You were talking a little bit about all the different stakeholders that you bring together to really identify what needs to happen in the program. How do you keep them aligned when there's different business units that have different rules or different tools or different requirements even?
I think the alignment comes from the fact that they're aligned to the company objectives. So if I take the sustainability angle, everybody in the organization knows there was a target to reach. Everyone was focused on managing it. If you looked at the commercial side of it, they were traveling a heck of a lot. You've got medical reps going out and meeting doctors and scientists, etc. They were traveling a heck of a lot. For them to manage sustainability and emissions reporting was a mammoth task. So we brought in something, a dashboard that would help them see what they were using in emissions and be able to talk to them about how they could improve it. Same thing applies to the HR or the finance teams. They've got to do their emissions, but we left the emissions to be at a much higher level. Within the commercial, it took it almost down to individual. You've got an emissions target to stick to as an individual when you're booking your travel versus you don't, I didn't need an emissions target myself because I didn't travel that much. So my boss's boss was managing it. So it's not that you're doing, how do you keep them aligned? They should be aligned to the company objectives, just as travel should be. It's how you do those tweaks to make it work for them. If we had applied this tool to manage emissions across the whole business globally, we would have created an industry in some parts of the business that wasn't needed. So it's that sense and common sense and approach. And again, back to the point about meeting with them and talking to them about what's important to them.
Danny, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, if you walk into a car sales showroom, or you walk into Marks and Spencers, or you go to the business travel show and meet with a lot of TMCs, the one question the suppliers should always be asking is, what problem do you need to be fixed? And it's no different for a travel manager, right? And whether it's a different business unit or whether it's a different part of the business, what problem are we trying to solve together? And it's understanding, exactly what they're looking to do. And we see it so many times. You get certain parts of the business want to add all this bureaucracy for safety and security measures when actually a lot of it's built into the existing environment. So it's, what problem are you trying to solve? And then very often there's a solution already sat there for them, right? Or there's a simple way to go about fixing something. So I always find that question usually teases out what you need and usually simplifies the process of getting to where you want to get to.
Danny, could I just, there was a question about what would you try and solve first? And you were saying like profiles, and I had the time to
Yeah.
sort of sit and think about what that would be for me. And if I think about the systems that we had that we'd put in place and then built on, and some of them were sort of, I'd like to go back to the whole, you've got a booking tool in one place, you've got a risk management system in another, you've got the expense system in another, you've got your approval process across the businesses where some are using a tool and some are using just a simple email or even an approval at the coffee machine, and bringing that all together in one place. Maybe there's a number of people on the call today that already have that, but I know in a big organization like AstraZeneca, we didn't. So if I could go back and start again, it's a bit like what we said at the start. How do you simplify it? Take that step back and take that bold, hard stop and look at what you're doing. That would be one of my things. Let's bring these things together. It doesn't mean they all have to be from one provider, but let's make sure they're connecting and talking to one another. What problem are we going to solve? The problem is this disconnected, long-winded, not simple way of an end-to-end booking, paying, managing, reporting travel process. That I would go right back to the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, we were privileged earlier last year now, isn't it? Keep getting confused what year we're in. Last year we were privileged where we were put in a position where we moved TMC, and we had to do that, right? And one of the big problems was our ability to reconcile and pay for travel quickly and efficiently. And we had to strip that back, and it did end up going all through to profiles, which meant I got the leverage in which to get a global HR feed built, which, some people weren't keen on doing it, but we had to do it. And then all of a sudden, we've been able to improve that invoice accuracy. We've been able to improve the booking process. We've been able to drive online adoption. We have, 90% less guest profiles than we used to. All those kind of good things came from just stepping back and going, what's the actual problem we need to solve here? And then we work back and where are those problems coming from in that ecosystem? So, yeah, no, it's a good one to do.
And And
I
another
think
one
you
on
both.
sim.
Go ahead, Kerrie.
I was just going to say another one on simple is if you think about when people are buying mobile phones or ordering a mobile phone or ordering a laptop, very often in the company there are 5 mobile phones you can choose from, 3 laptops within the budget. There is so much less choice of what you can buy. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do the same in your travel? You know, on this route, you can choose these 3 plane flights only, or these 3 hotels at that location. And I know I'm being a bit idealistic there, but I do wonder if sometimes we have too much choice of how we are spending the company money.
Oh, for sure. I think but the problem is it goes back to there's too much information available right out there, so people then all of a sudden goes back to the first point about I can find it cheaper online, even though we're giving them the right thing to do. It might look like it's costing a little bit more money, but there's all that hidden value beyond the transaction that isn't seen.
But
So
but
yeah,
to my point, why is someone not saying, well, I don't want a Samsung, I want an Apple or vice versa on the phone, and I don't want a Dell, I want this on the laptop. They don't because that's what the company policy is. It's almost like there's so much choice in the world of travel, isn't there?
is it because
There
we don't
is.
necessarily see the price at a point of sale when we're ordering a laptop internally, or
Possibly, yeah. I'm
I
gone
think
off on
I
a
think it all
tangent, Kim, sorry.
I think it all boils down to this. I mean, we've said it throughout, but transparency and communication really leads to simplification. And
Yeah.
what travel program leaders are looking for today is how do we simplify the program, and not just from a booking perspective, but from the time someone decides they need to take that trip on and through all the way until the time they get reimbursed and it's reconciled. So, Kerrie, Danny, I want to thank you for your time and your wonderful insights today. You can find the complete data and trends behind our discussion. Nicola from our team has actually posted it in the chat if you want to download or have access to that report. So thank you everyone for joining today, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future.